On today's episode of I Only Know How to Play One Game, we're going to be paying special attention to the Firelink Shrine, our home and safe haven throughout the entirety of Dark Souls 3. I use the term safe haven pretty loosely, to be clear, but what if we couldn't use any weapon, armor, ring, or titanite that isn't purchased, pillaged, or transposed on shrine property? That might be convoluted. So join me as we fail every NPC questline and sell our souls to the Handmaiden while hoping to answer the question, can I beat Dark Souls 3 with only Firelink Shrine gear? Now obviously this run doesn't allow the use of store ashes or tomes or scrolls or anything that can be grabbed outside of the shrine to improve vendor inventories. But what pickups are allowed? Well, really anything that doesn't fall under the big four there. But in practice, that just means we're going to grab the transposing kiln for a little more flavor and a few undead bone shards. As you can see, we're not really taking things all that seriously this time around, but don't worry, the next run will be worse. Now getting started, we pick the mercenary class for the desirable stats and load into the game before stripping down to our drawers. And right out of the gate, we're obviously not going to be picking up the Ashen Flask here in the cemetery, which, if you didn't know, locks us out of upgrading the charges for either flask, capping our Estus off at 3 uses. And I don't know if any of you guys are fucking math prodigies, but that is an 80% decrease in our healing ability from the 15 charges we're meant to have by the late game. Now heading into Gundyr, I'm pretty confident considering I just did this no-hit in the last video, and I was subsequently punished for my hubris. But once we're warmed up, it's business as usual, and after a couple hundred punches, the old boy goes back to bed, granting us access to the grounds of the Firelink Shrine, where we can pick up our first actual weapon, the Broken Straightsword. And we don't want to be stuck with this thing for any longer than absolutely necessary, so we need to go talk with our old friend about getting an upgrade. Then I picked up this bad wooden shield from this tree to see if that would help, before deciding to let gravity do the work on this one, earning us the Uchigatana and some new swag. Then we do the tree jump to grab this useless Estus shard and the Silver Serpent ring, swing by the handmaid to buy ourselves a coif, and make our way to the high wall of Lothric. We kill the Mimic, really just for the fun of it, snag Grey Rat Selkie, snag Grey Rat, spare Priestess Emma because I'm in a good mood, and make our way to the big metal dog. The tried and true method of staying way up in his business pays off, and before long we're catching a ride down to the undead settlement. And not long after arriving and picking up Yhorm, I get struck with the idea for a little experiment that demands we head back to the Cemetery of Ash. You've maybe noticed that the hardest part of this run is the severe limit on our weapon upgrading capabilities, but there's a certain lizard back in the cemetery that drops us a titanite scale we can use to upgrade a boss weapon. Issue being, we need him to die on the grounds of the Firelink Shrine for the scale to be usable. So after we clear out all the riffraff, we begin the process of guiding him back towards the shrine, hoping he'll pass through Gundyr's house. Unfortunately, he catches on and decides to go out with dignity, meaning we have to discard the scale and move on. Heading back to the undead settlement, we decide to save old pyromancer Cornix to take a look at his inventory back at the shrine, once again ignore Aldrich, have a really hard time getting through this specific door, and take a quick shot at the curse-rotted Greatwood with very little health to spare. We do not talk about what happened next, and attempt 2 goes perfectly swell, earning us the tree's soul and a little gift for our little buddy back home. Ludlith uses this gift to craft us the Pontiff's Left Eye Ring, which allows us to recover HP with successive attacks. Now that ability only really procs reliably when using very fast weapons or when attacking large groups, but it might still prove useful. And he also chefs up the Hollow Slayer Greatsword, which is slightly faster and notably less damaging than most other greatswords, but with the added bonus of doing 20% extra damage to any enemy considered hollow, which is probably like half of the shit in this game. It's a pretty good deal. So now we can run for our life out of this village, test the sword out on an unsuspecting outrider knight, run from the birds, and meet Anri and Horus, who would do anything for me. Once we're down in the Crucifixion Woods, we're going to switch things up and head towards the Cathedral first, because we've got some NPC quest lines we need to progress, meaning that the Crystal Sage has got to go. And once you learn to abuse the way that his AI will always teleport as far from you as possible, it's rare that he even gets a chance to attack, and we can show him proper disrespect before moving on. Then I get kinda lost looking for Orbeck, find Orbeck, and convince him to come back to the shrine to teach me sorceries. We're not actually going to learn sorceries because we're not fucking nerds, but if we play our cards right, he can help us acquire a damage boosting piece of gear. But now we need to get back on track, head through the colossal goatfuck in the road, and make our way into the cleansing chapel. Despite a close call or two, the cathedral doesn't give us too much grief, and we're more or less able to have fun and be ourselves while getting the place unlocked. The invasion from Kirk does end up being noteworthy, if only because it shows just how bad the damage drop-off from having an unupgraded weapon is, even this early in the game, but we might just have a solution here soon. I checked to see if Patches has spawned in, and he hasn't, because this game's quest lines are absolutely mental, so we stop worrying about it and head in to see the Deacons of the Deep. And if there's one bout in this game where the Pontiff's left eye will absolutely carry, not that most of you will need the extra help, it is this one. Because the health regen from constantly hitting multiple dudes at once means that you can basically just stand and tank every attack until the Deacons fall over. Very nice. And now that we're heading home, this is the unfortunate part, because to the best of my memory, this is the only point in the game that Anri and Horus will make their way to the Firelink Shrine, and we really want their stuff. With our damage output, a 2v1 is a tricky proposition, but thankfully, if we can survive long enough for the outside to load in, it turns out we can get the two stuck against an invisible wall and fight them like a coward. This approach works like a charm for Anri, but Horus's impressive length does get the best of us on this attempt. Thankfully, we both respawn back in the shrine where a proper duel can take place. And from our two dear friends, we've acquired our primary gear for the rest of the run. The Llewellyn shield is nothing overly special, but it has decent defensive stats all around and gives us a pretty agreeable set of parry frames. And Anri has awarded us Anri's Straightsword, a weapon that appears pretty innocuous when looking at the stat block, but has a couple interesting features. Firstly, it provides a very minor constant health regen, like so minor that it doesn't really come into play, but more importantly, while you wouldn't know it from checking the stats, the sword actually has roughly A-level scaling with the luck stat, which means that we are now making the fabled luck build on a character that isn't allowed to loot gear. The irony is not lost on me. But at +0, this sword is going to be a joke, so it's time to swing by the handmaid to buy a single prism stone and a large leather shield, because these two items can each be gifted to Snuggly the Crow for a couple twinkling titanites. Then we run around the back of the shrine and kill this lizard for one more, and suddenly, here we are with a +2 weapon, which is the highest that any of our weapons are going to go, because it is not possible for us to acquire 4 more twinklies. So the base damage is right where it's going to be for the rest of the run. But there's no time to worry about that, so we strap on some of Anri's clothes and make our way back to the Crucifixion Woods. I get a quick reminder of why you should never fight these two fairly, tag in Gravity for the big win once again, and begin the trek through Farron Keep. After 2 quick altar snuffings, we take the climb so we can face off with the stray demon. And while he does give us a good squeeze here, we're victorious in the end and can claim the stray demon's soul, which we can take home and transpose into Havel's ring, increasing our maximum equip load. and I don't think this actually proved beneficial to the build at any point, but it was nice to have just in case. With that, we just need to finish trekking through this absolute nightmare zone so we can make our way to the Abyss Watchers. And unfortunately, we have some pretty severe difficulty getting through the door, which sees us starting the fight poisoned and down 1 Estus. It didn't pan out. On the next run, I carry out a full-fledged Gru genocide on the way to the door, however, so we shouldn't run into the same issues. For the first phase, we work the parries whenever it's a one-on-one, run like a coward when it's a 2v1, and when the red eye shows up, all bets are off. In phase 2, I abandon the parries in favor of the tried and true, and before long, our first Lords of Cinder have been taken care of. Back home, we can get the Farron ring from Hawkwood, level up at Yhorm, send Greirat to pillage for the first time, and finally kill our good friend Lenny, earning us a spiffy new hat. And now that I can't possibly put it off any longer, it's time to speedrun the Catacombs. Another fun thing I learned about Anri Straightsword is that it has the same effect on skeletons as a blessed weapon, meaning they do not respawn when killed with it. This is quite nice. Anyway, we do the area as normal, cast the big rat into the pit, and waltz into the domain of High Lord Wolnir. Even with subpar damage output, there just isn't much to say about him, and bro ends up taking the big slide. Once we're back home, I noticed the way that I've started to break certain NPC questlines. For example, Yhorm is dead, but because I killed Anri, Yuria will never spawn in. And if there's no Yuria, I can't get the Morian blade from Orbeck. It was possible to time that out much better, but we'll just have to take the L. I kill Orbeck to see if he drops anything else of value, and he doesn't, so I just kind of feel like a dirtbag and have to move on to Cornyx, who I buy Fireball from. Testing the damage out against the Bridge Dog, it's nothing to write home about, but it does seem to stack decent poise damage with headshots, allowing me to get a big riposte and finish the fight early. Moving on, I get a quick reminder of why everyone sprints through Irithyll, sprint through Irithyll, and make my way down into the dungeon. We embarrass Alva, and then, you know, we're not exactly stopping to smell the roses here either. Once we're down in the profane capital, I want to try a different strategy against Yhorm, so we head home to buy a light crossbow and a handful of bolts from Greirat. The idea being that if hits to Yhorm's right arm can stagger him relatively quickly, surely hits to his head should stagger him even faster. The issue is that while the game does give you a lock-on point for Yhorm's head, the crossbow still has a very difficult time hitting it. If you're too close or too far away, if Yhorm moves even somewhat erratically, or if the game just kinda feels like it, you're almost guaranteed to either hit his chest or miss entirely. With that said, after almost 8 minutes and 95 crossbow bolts, the experiment did bear fruit and we get a big stagger. At that point, I kinda just wanted a clean slate though, so we try to bone out and end up being cut down. For round 2, we stick with the traditional approach, targeting the machete arm after Yhorm attacks. And our low damage does mean it takes even longer to get a stagger than usual, but trusting the formula works for us in the end, and after 11 minutes or so, the king goes down. And after this, it's time to do some NPC maneuvering, so we spend a whopping 20,000 souls on the Firelink Shrine's tower key, mainly for the purpose of luring out Patches, who locks us inside. But thankfully, we can roll to the bottom of the tower fairly easily and pick up the Estus ring, which will increase how much love we get out of our 3 heals. When we go find Patches inside the shrine, we forgive his silly antics and unlock him as a vendor. But the real benefit behind this is that Patches owes a debt to our buddy Greirat. So, we can send Greirat out on a mission to pillage Irithyll for valuable resources, and Patches should be there to back him up. Except, once Greirat has been sent, I can't seem to get Patches to say the dialogue that implies he's going to go help him. I'm not really sure what's going wrong there, but short of reloading the area forever and screaming to God, there's not a lot we can do about it, so we need to find a boss to kill and progress this situation. And before too long, I settle on the old demon king we left beneath the catacombs. So I kill the baby demon on the way, get beamed by the ballista twice, give the worm what it fucking deserves, and grab the nearby bonfire so I can check in with Patches one last time. Yeah, he's still not budging. And old Demon King was a pretty relaxing bout overall. Our damage is obviously not great, but his RNG wasn't nearly as annoying as last time, so we can still whack him to death with pretty minimal issue. But now, it's time for the moment of truth, so I head over to Irithyll, fight through the spider ladies, and yep, this plan went tits up, and we just lost access to Grey Rat's inventory and the upgrade materials he would have brought home. I wanted to figure out where I might have gone wrong, like I thought maybe it had to do with not progressing Siegward's quest far enough, so I consulted the internet, and it seems that entering Irithyll Dungeon, or at least progressing partway into it, damns Grey Rat to die no matter what. So to recap, you have to enter Irithyll to progress his quest, but if you enter literally the very next adjoining area, you fail it. And I think that's really this game's quest lines in a nutshell. But there's no crying in baseball, and we gotta move on. So I go visit Patches, and honestly, I had not moved on, so I stabbed him through the lung and brought his inventory over to the handmaid. With that housekeeping item out of the way, it's time to go deal with Pontiff Sulyvahn. And for the first time ever in one of these videos, I actually have a proper parrying shield for this fight, which means we can throw down in style. Keep an eye out for attacks from the Flaming Sword, as most of them are fair game, and before long, we put the Pontiff in a wood. And after that wonderful fight, we get to do something substantially worse, which is fight these big dogs in this secret pond. And the reason we're doing it is because killing them both unlocks a new armor set with the Shrine Handmaiden. And even though we're not going to use it, I figured you guys deserve to know. Now my question is it just me that cannot fight these fucking things for the life of me, or do we all collectively hate them? Anyway, several tries later, we do finish them off and we can move on. Back at the shrine, we ignore the armor we just earned to buy Anri's hat instead, and start stocking up on the human pine resin from Patches' inventory, because a few of the remaining bosses have a weakness to dark damage. And then, that's right, we're on to the best part of the run.
What is wrong, unkindled one?
We resin up and give the dancer our best shot, but she does shred us pretty good on this initial attempt. Try number 2 is smooth as a marble, however, and outside of a lucky slash, there's nothing she can really do before her performance is cut short. And we're actually not going up into Lothric Castle right now. I just really wanted to make sure I got to kill Priestess Emma myself. Instead, we're heading back towards Anor Londo by way of Irithyll. And once we're in the big city, we hide and run from the disgusting fucking cat thing, and pay a visit to the Saint of the Deep. And while Aldrich is well known for occasionally being an annoying little bitch, once you've done this fight with level 1 stamina, he can no longer really hurt you, and before long, he's been taken care of. Meaning that Lothric Castle is now the only place left to go, and I decide to switch things up and take a crack at the Consumed King's Garden and the Consumed King himself before anything else. And I would say that this is definitely the point in the run where the consequences of +2 weapon start to become somewhat severe, because our gear is meant to be close to maxed out by this point, so even with our luck already raised to the soft cap, we're basically giving him paper cuts, and a brief moment of carelessness does get me stomped out on the first attempt. But Dragon Boy is still incredibly weak to classic taint targeting, so while it takes considerable time, we do dethrone him and carry on. And this is the point in the run where something really funny happened. My recording software crashed and corrupted the video file. But what did we lose? Well, the entirety of the Untended Graves, including several champion Gundyr attempts, and the run-up to the Dragonslayer armor. Now that run-up doesn't really matter, nothing cool happened anyway, but losing Gundyr was pretty rough. I promise you, you are not as annoyed as I was. But I do have a real person job, so instead of starting the run over, I'll have to settle for doing a demonstration of how things went. Firstly, sprint through here. If the Crystal Lady spawns in, beat her savagely. And once you're in the Gundyr arena, he'll be about here, start doing a whole lot of this. Our abysmal damage meant that parries were the only real way to end the fight sometime this week, and almost every single attack from his halberd can be parried, so learn the timing for those, and run anytime he uses the rest of his body. After that, you're going to want to bully some of these Black Knights. And then I had a bit of an internal debate when I reached the Flameless Shrine about whether I should be allowed to loot the gear here. I mean, it is literally the Firelink Shrine, but I do think that kind of goes against the spirit of the run, so I made a compromise. All I did was drop down this little hole, rip the eyes out of this corpse here, which basically don't even do anything, you know, and then I went home. Scout's honor. And now it's time for the Dragonslayer armor. And he's a fight that we're pretty well versed in, so even though he does his best to confuse the camera, we wait for our attack windows and eventually whittle him down. Now heading into the Grand Archives, I'm sorry to say that it is a very clean run. I think I learned every lesson I needed to from the last video, so we avoid most of the riffraff, cut down the Crystal Sage for a scroll we can't use, have a pleasant jog along the rooftops, ignore the gankers, and hit the elevator outside the Twin Princes boss room. And I think I must have realized I only needed a few more souls for a level up or something, because then I spent way too much time trying to parry a guy who I do not think can be parried. That obviously didn't lead to anything, so we go regroup, buy a stupid looking hat, and head into the Prince's fight. And I am once again sorry to report that I am on fucking fire, gentlemen. Now obviously I didn't no-hit them or anything, I'm not actually good, and the fight did take over 4 minutes, but we have, in a very roundabout way, ended the brothers' curse. It feels good to do good. And you guys know what this means. There's only 2 bosses left before we can stand before the fire guy himself. So we head back to the Irithyll Dungeon, partake in the scenic yoga, and find ourselves transported to Archdragon Peak, where our damage drop-off has reached its final form, and it takes us multiple minutes to clear out the enemies enough to sit down at the fire. And then, I'll be honest with you guys, things got a little bit out of hand. I stripped off my armor to be as aerodynamic as possible, went into the Wyvern's arena, and died on the ladder. And I figured that was just a fluke, so I went back in, running an even more pristine route, and died on the ladder. Seeing as how the naked thing wasn't panning out, I put the armor back on, charged into the Wyvern's arena, and died almost immediately. I sincerely think this might be the worst Wyvern attempt that's ever been documented. Okay, new plan. Armor comes back off, and we sharpen the route to pristine new levels. Bingo. Then I wanted to see if you could punch assassinate this godlike being of stone, and you totally can. Thank Christ. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think either of us has any interest in the rest of this area, because we've got a race trader and his pet bird to deal with. And I could fill a fucking textbook with all the ways that this first phase is awful, but the first few deaths were definitely my bad, because I kept getting underneath him and letting the camera spurg out. But once I remembered to keep it all out in front, my training from the last video kinda kicked in, and things became a bit of a cakewalk. Now, despite a no-hit finish of Phase 1, our first crack at Phase 2 ends without much fanfare. And dear lord, even while exploiting his dark damage weakness, these are basically Eskimo kisses. And the next attempt is more of the same, but the Nameless King did make the mistake of attacking, thus showing me the patterns that my little rat mind can internalize and use against him. Next try has a phase 1 hiccup, but the bird goes down all the same. And phase 2 gets off to a bit of a nasty start, draining us of our Estus, but the resulting adrenaline seemed to activate some kind of flow state, and the final 3 or so minutes of the fight go flawlessly, allowing us to send Gwyn's baby boy down where he belongs. Which means that we are formally in the endgame, so we can head home, organize our head collection, enjoy the in-engine cutscene, and teleport to the kiln of the first flame. And our first crack at the Fireboy gives us an idea of the damage we'll be dealing. I'm sure it doesn't need to be said, and it ends deep into the first phase with him giving us the ultimate disrespect. Attempt 2 is a bit cleaner, though he's never been a boss that I could learn perfectly, so we still slide into phase 2 with 1 Estus left and almost immediately get gripped on. Some things never change. But thankfully, I've already fucking killed Gwyn in a game with way slower movement, so with about half a hit left on the health bar, we cut the old man down. Then we can call in the Firekeeper, and I made the split-second call that there was really only one ending that properly suited the remorseless serial killer energy of this run, so we whack our homegirl and claim the fire for ourselves. Or whatever the fuck is happening right now. And successfully beat Dark Souls 3 with only Firelink Shrine gear. Sort of. Big thank you to everyone for wasting your valuable time with me. If you'd like to waste more of it, feel free to check out another video or consider becoming a channel member. I've got one members only video up right now, and an unedited run of Dark Souls 3 where I just kinda yap the whole time will go up for members only in the next week or two. I'll talk to you guys later.